Well, thanks for coming. I hope everybody had a good day yesterday and the last 2 days before that. It's fun islands, isn't it? Beautiful, lovely, and a nice history. So anyway, today is just a fun item on some of the legends of the waters we're going through, and then tomorrow Vigo, of course. So. What do I know? Okay, anyway, tomorrow we're going to talk about Vigo, but yeah, and then the day after that will be there. Okay, so get down there. Anyway, a little bit about these stories that are here. Everybody seems to enjoy hearing these mythical stories and what-ifs. And of course, the Atlantic's a huge ocean that people have been sailing for thousands of years, so it's pretty natural, even in the northern part. There's going to be a lot of stories developing. People out there in the middle of nowhere, and they wonder about these forces on them. So, of course, one of it is imagining great gods are causing storms and huge problems. So that goes back a long way. If you've ever read, the Odyssey, for example, it talks about the gods fighting and starting winds and so on. As good an answer as any for the time. And the Greeks, of course, we know a lot of theirs. These wonderful statues they have. And several in this museum in Athens, if you've had a chance to visit some magnificent ones. But Poseidon certainly was one the seafaring Greeks knew a lot about. But other peoples in the oceans did as well. There's a Hindu god, and there's one from Polynesia. Don't look very happy, do they? I wouldn't want to curse them. Anyway, a little different than the Disney films. So how do people find out? Well, it's the way you always do it with science. You see things, you make theories up, you test them out, you make more observations, you see what works. You keep realizing that what you know may not be complete. And from that, you try and find as far as you can. It never ends. There aren't quick answers. During the pandemic, it was kind of depressing watching people almost waiting for an answer before the credits roll. It's not that fast. And people learn. Things change. Anyway, the people have been exploring the oceans for a long, long time. And the first real person who shot off and out away from the coast, as far as anyone knows, was Pytheas, who was apparently a trader who really was pushing out from the known world, looking and exploring for new places. We don't have his direct logs. Unfortunately, those were probably burned in the Library of Alexandria. But there's a lot of references to what he wrote. So they know he was probably going along the coast of Europe and cut over into the British Isles, which they sort of knew about at the time. And then from there it gets a little uncertain. His descriptions could be to Iceland, it could be the Faroes, possibly to Norway or even into the Baltic. But the point is he was talking about these places where the sun didn't get high and it was cold and there was ice. A lot of the ancient peoples didn't believe him, actually. But the records were kept, so at least they sort of knew there was something out there. And he talked about this place he finally went as Ultima Thule, the furthest place out in the world. And Thule, spelled a little differently here, was sort of in the back of people's heads, as far as you can go and the end of things. It showed up, actually, unfortunately, in the 19th century. Some crackpot anthropologists came up with an idea that the Aryans came from here. I mean, it's bizarre stuff. But the idea was this is as far, I think you see it in Conan stories and things like this. And the other side of the world is kind of interesting. When the British were exploring south, I believe it was George Vancouver was a young midshipman on one of Cook's ships, and he got out on the bowsprit when he went as far as they could. He didn't quite get to Antarctica. And he yelled, I'm at the ultimate point here. And then they turned the ship around, and apparently nobody went further south for 100 years or so. So people always were pushing the limits of where they could go. And from what the Greeks knew, Aristophanes came up with this idea of the world circling ocean. I don't know if it was original with him, but he would push that. Aristophanes, I talked about earlier in navigation, how he figured out the size of the world pretty closely. And this was called the T&O map. It's the idea you had the continents here, and then maybe Africa was circumnavigable, it was too hot to get there. And they kind of knew about India and China, sort of. And so this is sort of a picture. There's Thule way up in the distance there. So there was something anyway, an idea about where the world was and where it ended. And these Greeks these people weren't dumb by any means. They knew a lot for their time. This was found in 1901 off Crete, and nobody realized what it was. It was some piece of junk and encrusted with rust and stuff, coral. And it was put away, and eventually folks took a good look at it and said, wait a minute, this thing's got gears and wheels and all kinds of stuff in it, and pieces to it. And they were able to clean it up somewhat, and it turns out it's a very complex mechanical calculator. So they found other pieces later. Cousteau searched for some, and they found pieces with information on it, such as the orbit of Venus and so on. So they think it was something like this, although we don't quite have enough. The Lego one is kind of interesting, a big project. But these folks were pretty sharp for what they had, given the limited technology of the time. Well, jump ahead 1,000 years or so, and people still think the world's round, but Europeans anyway saw it as pretty simple. When the devil landed, all the land went to the northern hemisphere to escape from him. That's what Dante said, So we have this idea that there was a giant pile of land in the south that stuck together, and at the top of it is the Garden of Eden, and the rest is water, and so on and so on. So it's an image of the world in any case. And you found that Jerusalem was usually the top of medieval maps, and hence the word is the Orient, and hence the word orienteering yourself. Well, people obviously wonder because we're a curious species. What is beyond there? What is out there? And of course, people would come up with ideas and legends and so on. Like the Canaries, a little bit based on reality, but not entirely. So they had an idea that maybe if you could sail around the world, as Magellan did in 1519, you go a little bit further south, you get to the great southern continent. And because they have to, otherwise the world tips. They didn't know about gravity. So they kept imagining this, and it really was Cook was sent out there to find this, the first voyage. And Australia, and they kind of knew Antarctica was probably somewhere or something like that, and that's about it. But they had this image of this place way out there. And of course, lots and lots of islands. There's a nice book called No Longer on the Map about all the mythical islands that supposedly existed in the world. And there are a lot of them. And you can see the whole Atlantic's just covered with them. There's the Azores. And you can see Madeira a little further north. Those kind of, Cape Verdes maybe. So those are kind of there. But then beyond that, it gets pretty weird pretty fast. Yeah, well, people saw something in the fog, or they saw an iceberg, or, And then this got into the 20th century. People were seeing reflections of the ice in the far Arctic, around even as late as like 1900, 1910, and imagining entire vast islands and continents and stuff around the North Pole. And it wasn't until later expeditions looked, they said, sorry, it's just glare you're seeing. So again, we talked about this a little before. You have some people were sailing along the coast in the 14th, 15th centuries, and it was easy enough to hit the Canaries, the Cape Verdes, Madeira. So there was some basis for seeing islands, and it was easy enough to imagine, gee, if I found this, maybe there's someplace else I can claim. With a little bit of luck and a little bit of wish fulfillment, maybe you'd see it. So some of them were quite imaginative. It's High Brazil. They recycled the name when they got to South America. There was this place that kind of moved around in the ocean that they kept looking for it. It's a mystical place. Yeah. It's just I started out there off Ireland. And then this kind of gets mixed up with the Arthurian legend, which I guess got recycled into Lord of the Rings too, but these, mysterious places. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't go this one either, but so here's an interesting one. When the Moors came into Spain, there's legends that 7 bishops and 7 towns took all their people and escaped west. You can see Spain and North Africa in the map there, and that they found this magical place where everybody lived well and it was full of gold and everything else. And it was sort of one of these places that became very mythical, and they kept looking for Antilia. Eventually it became the Antilles when they got to there. It's interesting how names go around. California was apparently named from a novel about a mythical land of wonderful spring and everything that was kicking around when the Spanish got there. So names show up in different ways. And then the Spanish were looking for the 7 cities, and somehow they got moved to the American Southwest. So Coronado was looking for him. And interestingly enough, he didn't find Cibola, but that is the name of one of the counties of New Mexico. So they kind of picked up on that too. But of course, this was the one that was everybody knows about. Sure. It was surprising when I started doing this. I'd done something on Egypt, and I was amazed how many cultural references there are to the pyramids and stuff like this, and how it gets so confused and put into so many things. Everywhere, games and vending machines, and what can I say? Some of the stuff in the casino, it shows up every place. But Atlantis does too. The idea of the magical, mystical place that disappeared shows up in a good Heinlein story, in fact. But this is just some of the movies I found that show it. And it's fun. Some of them are pretty good. And I don't know about Hercules, but But anyway, you see all these things that show up. I like the Lost Continent movie from '61. To achieve from Get Smart is in there as the high priest and stuff. But anyway, yeah, Stargate. Okay, anybody has fun with these. So anyway, Plato wrote about it, and he discussed it, and he said it was way out there, and it sunk and all this. And so that's kind of one estimate of what it might have been like, and about where he said it was, and so on. And it doesn't match. I mean, every now and then they find this coral kind of in rocks, and they it's the staircase of Atlantis, It never is. So, I bet some people have been to Santorini, right? And did they say it was Atlantis? Not exactly, but it could be, maybe. Well, you don't know. I mean, it's one of those things. So, but the whole Aegean is pretty volcanically active. And the island itself, it blew around 1600 BCE. You can see it's where the crater is, essentially. And there's some theories that maybe the Cretan Minoan civilization was destroyed because of the ash and dust coming. And some people think the days of darkness in the Bible in Egypt might have been related, but the timing doesn't quite work. But it's possible this was all connected in one way or another. Beautiful area. Yeah, so the rock's pretty hard. They actually used it for lining the Suez Canal. Everybody in Greece got a brother or a cousin or somebody in Brooklyn, it seems.
Florida too.
Yeah, Florida too. But man, the food is great. So you don't know. I mean, it could be. Actually, Greece went into a dark age after this period. So it could have wrecked all the civilizations then. It took about, almost 1,000 years before they redeveloped writing and laws and so on. So that's when all the legends are coming up and all the mythical stuff. Yeah. Okay, well, here's another one everybody's heard of. Yeah. Yeah, and it gets a lot of attention, and there's, many books have been written about this, supposedly, and so on, and so on, and so on. Well, sorry. I hate to rain on people's parade. It's so much fun. I mean, the world's full of stories. I had one person telling me the Hebrew slaves built the pyramids. I said, no, that was Land of the Pharaohs. That was that movie, they're going to believe what they want. But anyway, people bring up all kinds of explanations of why this has to be true, and one of them is compasses vary. Have you ever seen any of these silly TV movies? Oh, look, the compass is spinning on the plane. No, well, compasses vary. I'm sorry, the North Magnetic Pole is a fixed point, more or less. And as you go east or west of it, you have to adjust for the fact that the compass isn't going to point exactly to it. So we're lucky where I live over in Minnesota, where I learned to fly in Wisconsin, it's just about lined up. But if you go much further either direction, you've got to add or subtract. East is least, west is best. You've got to add and subtract for the variation before you can use the compass to measure north. That's natural. It's all over the world. That's the way it is. Okay, well, the Sargasso Sea, which was another one of those bad movies, and it's so thick with seaweed. Apparently, some of those legends go back to the Spanish in the 16th century. We're in all the seaweed. It's so thin you can't even see it. You swim in it, which nobody likes. But the point is that it's not going to stop anything. And if anybody sailed from Miami to Europe, yes, nobody. Yeah, okay, sure. You didn't get trapped in the seaweed, right? No. Okay, well, people bring this up. If you saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind, they have the planes finding from 1945, and this ship disappeared, and that plane disappeared, and if you look at the Wikipedia site I was looking at this morning, there's a few dozen of these things. So it sounds, oh gosh, things go in there and they vanish. Well, yeah, but heavily traveled area, the percentage of stuff that vanishes is microscopic compared to it. Big storms, yeah, guess what? Atlantic hurricanes. Guess what? Major fronts move through here. You go out in a little boat, maybe you're not that's such a good idea at this time of day or year. So what happened is that things do vanish, but for reasons. The Flight 19 is what gets everybody excited, and there is pretty good evidence what happened is they just got lost. Their flight commander insisted that he was east of Florida. It was at nighttime, and he apparently went north from there and paralleled the coast and kept looking for the Florida. He thought he was going to hit Key West, maybe a little south, and it got totally mixed up, and he missed the Bahamas, and just basically they ended up running out of fuel. The Cyclops, there's actually 3 ships like that disappeared. It's very tragic. They had hundreds of people on them. Apparently these were old ships carrying a lot of oil, and it was not well stored. They think that they got into the wooden containers with wooden beams and probably ate them out. They were in bad shape anyway. It was a very old ship, and it probably just literally fell apart. The DC-3, people say that one found that their batteries were low when they took off. It was sloppy. And they didn't get wind changes, they didn't acknowledge, and they probably just got blown right off course. Again, this is 40s, they didn't have the navigation they have. And there's other cases like this, but that seems to be the answer to these things. So there's a little thing here about how the Coast Guard said that they looked at these and they could not find anything showing this was unusual, and so on. But of course, people are still going to obviously believe what they want to believe. No extraordinary factors have ever been identified. Yeah, conspiracy theory, right? No. Okay. So another issue, you read these books, it moves. Yeah, people say, well, it's Bermuda. Well, yeah, there might be one anchor of it, maybe, but you look at some of them take it as far as the Azores. Somebody wrote a book, including almost the coast of Ireland. You see, off Venezuela, you throw in the Gulf of Mexico for good measure. Yeah, you make it big enough, you can get lots of things to disappear. So, and there's another place off Japan where they tried to do that. It's fun, but I wouldn't worry about it. So, lots of stories. Can we say that all of them are just made up? No. It's sometimes weird stuff is true. I mean, Einstein didn't believe black holes could exist. He saw them in his math. He said that's just an artificial outcome of the numbers. Can't really exist. So sometimes, people discover things where they didn't expect it. Happens a fair number of times in science. That stuff that people didn't think was there is there, but it's a matter of getting evidence of it. So, sea monsters, of course. And then, giant squid, that's pretty good. People reported squids and whales fighting each other. So again, folks sort of laughed at these stories, but yeah, I can see this happening. Big. What's for dinner? But it's, I mean, there's going to be some very big stuff down there nobody's seen. Who knows what else? I wouldn't doubt that there's a lot, we don't know much about a lot of these areas. So, yeah. Rogue waves, another one. Did you hit anything in the Antarctic? We hit something in our little ship I was taking from Ushuaia in Argentina to the peninsula. I think it was a roll. I mean, this whole ship went, it was a tiny ship, 120 people, even less on board. The whole ship went sideways. Yeah, it was wham. And it knocked over heavy furniture. One person got a dislocated shoulder, and the physician popped it back in okay, but I mean, it was just amazing. So, yeah, that's when you appreciate what the sea can do. So anyway, what happened is they take the third tallest, the 1/3 of the waves, the highest one, so they average them. If it's double that, then they call it rogue. So there's no reason you couldn't also have a space between these things building up and end up with a hole, which would be, I think, much worse, because you can't imagine a ship supported at either end of that. So these things have been reported for a couple hundred years, although they weren't accepted really for a long time as existing. So they found, they think it might be possible to get up, 75, 80 feet maybe. It's a picture somebody took off of British Columbia. So this was some data I did find where they reported them, and there are attempts with buoys now to do a lot more work with them, as well as satellites, and try and predict them. But yeah, they are out there. It's a harmonic motion, they just sort of crease on top of each other. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Is that movie as bad as I remember it? Oh, it's fine. I mean, what can you do? Shelley Winters is a heroic savior of all the people, Gene Hackman, wasn't it? He was hanging off the wheel, screaming and turning. Okay. It's fun. What can you say? Popcorn. So, a lot of things are out there, and St. Brendan kicks around as one. So this is fully in the 5th century, he traveled in a crock. So it's what it is, it's a light fishing boat. It's made, they actually have leather sides to it. It's, as people who sailed in these modern reproductions say, the smell is pretty medieval from the leather. But in any case, you can see they look fairly stable, but couldn't be terribly comfortable to be in for a long time. But the story is supposedly he took off with a few other monks and they got out off Ireland and they had all these adventures and they landed on a giant island turned to be a whale or, these kind of things. And then he traveled around the Atlantic and came back with all this. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting account anyway, but how do you get to the bottom of it? Supposedly he met, sea people and stuff. This was an interesting one. First, it's in the part of the legend that Judas did one good deed in his life, so he's let out of hell for an hour, a year, and Brendan runs into him. Typical late 19th century kind of drawing. So, anyway, that's an idea. But if you ever got to Bermuda, the museum there, at least I did when I was there a long time ago, they had exhibits of Brendan seeing all these birds rising around him, and that's Cahobe, which people always talk about how it does have sort of a human-like cry. Interesting thing with that bird is that they thought it went extinct around 1630. And in 1951, at 5 rocks in Hamilton Harbor, they found a county of them. And they've since brought them back, and they've come back pretty well. So everybody's amazed that they actually were able to recover and were left alone all that time. So maybe somebody went out there and saw birds like this and said they sound like humans, and the account from there went to, they were human cries. And who knows? So Iceland might have had a few Irish monks on it when the Vikings showed up. Again, that's kind of iffy, but it's possible. So in 1976, somebody actually built something like what Brendan probably had and decided to sail it to America. It was a pretty tough voyage. Ship rolled. You can imagine what this was like to be in an open boat like this, conditions. And the first year they got from Ireland, they made their way up through the Hebrides, and they get to the Faroes and to Iceland. And then the second year, they actually worked their way out to past Greenland and finally made it to Newfoundland. So, yeah, it in theory is possible. Fighting the ghost, Well. So, we understand the Atlantic. You can see there's no place for Atlantis in there, really. What you have is that mid-Atlantic rift there where the continents are splitting right through Iceland, and they're slowly pulling apart. And at least this part is understood, even though the mapping is still going on. There's just some new discoveries recently off Iceland about how some volcanoes form in the bottom of the ocean. But what you got is all these crustal plates, and the continents are like granite on top of heavier basalt, which is the ocean bottoms. And they move. And this was the problem 100 odd years ago when a man named Wegener came up with this theory. They said, how can continents move? And they had no idea. Well, what it is you've got the mantle, which has got heat, and it's slowly circulating and pulling apart on bumper cars. Where does the heat come from? Yeah, exactly. Nobody knew about nuclear power. They didn't have this. So and when they understood, oh, it's thorium and uranium breaking down is giving enough heat. Because it really was an issue for a long time. 19th century, the physicists said that something like the Earth is going to go stone cold in 30 million years. And the geologist said the Earth is hundreds of millions of billions of years old, and it's still warm. So they couldn't figure out what they were missing was that heat source. So it moves about as fast as your fingernails grow. I've spent a lot of time, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard all this before, but it is kind of amazing. Africa is slowly splitting, and you have South America is pushing its way up and crumpling up and forming the Andes and so on. Africa is pushing north and forming the Alps. And India is pushing into Asia, making the Himalayas and so on and so on. So we can take a look. We've gone back here. We're in a period, of course, when things are pulling apart. Fossil record's pretty good for showing when things split too. It's different species changing. And sometimes they come together again. The world's round, they're going to come around and bump into one another. And maybe 7 times they've been supercontinents. So the best guess is you wait long enough and everything comes back. Yeah, I know. Well, can you say it had Pangea, had Rodina, had a number of other earlier ones, but it's kind of amazing the way they keep fitting, and they fit in different ways. It's just so interesting. And just to finish up on this, you have a tremendous amount of energy going through. You know, the Earth rotating, you get Coriolis force pushing the currents, you get heating at different levels, we all know that. We're out of the tropics now, so it's a little cooler. And the currents moving and so on and so on. And a very active, very energetic world we live on. And also 3D, what happens? Cold water sinks. Salt water's heavier. So you get circulation, which is one reason why there's so much concern with the warming of the oceans. This could totally mess up the patterns we have. Would it reach a tipping point? Probably not the day after tomorrow movie, but yeah, who knows what's going to happen. Europe is kept so warm because of that nice Gulf Stream going there. Lose that, and I think everybody in England's going to want to move to Spain. Okay, so the ocean still has a huge number of mysteries in it. They've been exploring off Alexandria. The sea levels rose. A lot of the edge of the city, ancient city, sunk. They're still looking for things like Alexander the Great's sarcophagus and Cleopatra's palace and things like this. You know, finding a lot of things in that area. We'll keep looking. That's about all we can do. Okay. Anybody have any thoughts? Anything you'd like to share? Opinions? Questions? No? Push me off the edge of the world? No?